Hello and welcome back to the Unveiled Widow podcast. I am so glad that you decided to join me again today. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button there at the bottom so that you will receive any additional videos that I put up. I will post almost every single week. You may even catch a video in between there, but make sure you subscribe so that you catch all my videos. All right, so the last episode we were talking about part 2 of my husband's cancer journey, which ultimately led to me becoming a widow as he did not make it through his terminal illness, which was colon cancer. So today I want to talk to you about preparing for the loss. That's not something that is ever easy to do. And there's like 3 things that I just want to say in relation to preparing for the loss. One, there's never going to be enough time. As you will see if you watch the last podcast, and if you haven't, please make sure that you go back and watch them. The last podcast, we really talked about time, that my husband was given time to be able to say goodbye to people, to be able to spend with us. We were blessed with time to be able to spend with him and ultimately prepare to say goodbye. But the reality is, no matter how much time you have, there's still never enough time to have to say goodbye. That's just the reality. There's never enough time to have to say goodbye because at the end of the day, you never really want to have to say goodbye. So number 1, there's never enough time. 2, you're never going to be prepared enough. No matter how much you try to prepare, I know since we did have a little bit of time, we tried to start getting some things in order, things that my husband didn't even realize were still active and valid at the time, like our life insurance policy. He thought it had expired, but God was very gracious and it had not. It was still active and valid, and that definitely helped me and the children out after his passing, and also being able to pay for his passing. But just know that no matter how much you prepare, you're still going to feel like you're never prepared enough. And I'll go a little bit into that because since we did have a little bit of time to prepare, to kind of get things in order with respect to the loss. We were able to do some things, but still, even after I completed all of that and, was able to kind of get ready, I still was not prepared for the loss. So you're never actually fully or really prepared. You don't ever have enough time. You're never actually really prepared. Number 3 that I want you to understand as you're preparing for loss is be prepared that people are going to show who they really are during the time of loss. I know there was always a saying that my mom would say is that funerals and weddings bring out the best in people. And the reality is, if your best is your worst, then that's what you're showing during those times. You're showing your best, which may not be that great. But be prepared to know that a loss is going to bring out the best and the worst in people. And if their worst is their best during that time and season, that's exactly what you're going to see. And sometimes those things can be hurtful because it can come from the people you least expect it the most from. Which oftentimes are the ones that have been closest to you, the ones that you felt would have been your support system, or in some aspects, they may have even been your support system. But during a portion of the process, they show a side of them that you never would have expected. So number 3, be prepared for people to show you the best and worst of them. So in preparing for loss, as it related to me and my family, as you know, like I said, we were kind of given some time. My husband was in and out of By the time in 2018, where his colon cancer had really started to take a turn for the worse, he was pretty much in and out of hospitals, in and out of treatment centers. So a lot of the last couple of months of his life, we spent back and forth with doctors' offices, hospitals, emergencies, as well as we ultimately put him in an assisted living home because that was going to be the best thing for us and our family. We didn't want my husband, to pass away in the home. It was already very difficult for my children that were living at home to watch him continue to keep deteriorating. And we didn't want that stigma to be in the home as well, that daddy died in the home. And also because I was the only one that was tending to him, me and my children. I couldn't keep doing everything by myself. I'm fairly petite. And even though my husband had lost a lot of weight, literally by the time he ended up passing, he was down in size, almost close to my daughter's weight, which they were around about 120 pounds. He may have been just a little bit heavier than that, maybe between about 125, 130 maybe. But he had really dropped in weight. So I was completely caring for him, cleaning him, changing him, having to move him from one place to another. And we looked at potentially having like hospice come into the home. But ultimately they would still only be able to be there, a couple of hours a week. And the rest of that process and weight would have been on me and my children. And that was just going to be a lot to bear, not just for me, but for my children. They were already dealing with a lot. So preparing for, preparing for loss. We went through a lot of things. During that time, as I mentioned, my husband was kind of in and out of hospitals, in and out of care. Ultimately, we had placed him in like an assisted living kind of convalescent home, hospice home. And we would drive down and go and see him, and my family would go and see him. But at the same time that he was being put into that home, like I said, there was so much going on. My oldest daughter was in college and she was having to have knee surgery. So the day that he was being placed in the home, I was flying out to Northern California because she was having surgery that same exact day, so that I could be there with her during her surgery, and to help her recoup at least for a couple of days. And then I turned around and flew right back home, and I was right back there with him in the hospice home. And then we were preparing because the school season was just getting ready to start. Literally, sadly for my children, he actually passed on their first day of school, on their first day going back to school in 2018. So just a lot was going on, and in us trying to prepare, I was trying to make sure the life insurance policy was intact. I was trying to make sure that I was getting things together for him. And I know a lot of people might think that this is morbid, or I even had some people that got a little offended when I mentioned that I was able to show him his homegoing program that we were going to have at the funeral. But for him, he was very happy about that, because anybody that knows my former husband, they know he's very big about being able to delegate, being able to give his input. And this allowed him to give his input on who he wanted to speak, who he wanted to make sure that I reached out to, who he wanted to make sure was on the program, and who didn't have to be on the program. So even though it may have seemed like morbid, or you were already, kind of throwing in the towel. We weren't throwing in the towel, but we had already come to the recollection of this is where, unless God was going to intervene, this is where my husband was going to be heading. And he had finally had come to grips with it. I'm going to be very honest. While we were in the hospital, my children and I knew that he wasn't going to make it. But it literally took him until almost 2 weeks before his passing for him to finally acknowledge and say he knew that he wasn't going to make it. So it wasn't until around that 2-week period, maybe matter of fact a week before his passing, I had already kind of started preparing. I do a lot of creative work with programs and invitations and things of that nature. So I had already started working on his homegoing program. And a week before his passing, I was able to show that to him. I pretty much had it all put together, and the people that I felt that he wanted to be able to be on the program and to have words. And he went through the program, and one of the things that was starting to happen because of his cancer getting worse is his eyesight was also starting to kind of dwindle. And so he had asked me, let me see it, because I had it on my phone. And he was looking and he was blowing it up and looking at things, and he would ask me, where's this person? Where's this person at? What are they doing? Are they on there? So it allowed him to be able to have input in who was going to be able to play a part in saying goodbye to him. And so as much as it might seem morbid to others, he wholeheartedly appreciated. He even said to me, he's like, babe, I know this was hard because it was very difficult, trying to read the program to him, because like I said, his eyesight was going, and I had to read the program to him. And yeah, it was tough because I was already living out what I was going to have to potentially do, very much so in the near future. So one of the things that I will say in preparing for loss, and I will discuss this a little bit further in another episode, is that I was able to begin my grieving process early, because I knew he had a terminal illness, because I knew where we were at with respect to the stage in his illness. It allowed me to, in some form or fashion, mentally try to prepare for the fact that he is going. It allowed me to grieve in advance, which is called anticipatory grief, because I was already anticipating his loss. This would be the same for anyone else who may be dealing with a loved one who's dealing with a terminal illness, or something that is going to be leading to them losing their life, them leaving here. You are able to go through this process in advance. Not that you deal with all of it in advance, because trust me, I did not. Yes, I was able, like I mentioned before, I would go in my closet and I would cry, and I would let everything out, how I was feeling, my hurt, my shame, my pain, my sorrow, everything, my concerns. I would go into my closet and I would just cry and boohoo and get it all out. And, even asking God, why did this have to be me? And then ultimately you have to get to a place where you say, God, well, why not me? Everybody's going to go through something in life, and why not me? Why wish this on someone else? And I would never wish having to go through this on anyone else. But it allowed me to prepare in that sense. But ultimately, you're never fully prepared. So even though I was able to have a program ready, and even though I was able to kind of talk with him, and my children were able to talk with him and say their goodbyes. And he slowly allowed me to start bringing people in, because he really didn't even want, because it took him so long to really admit that he was not going to make it. He would not allow me to call a lot of people, and I would always ask him, like I wanted to call the people that was closest to him. His best friend Bill, who they were roommates for years, and our friends Richard and Lisa, and our really close friends Georgie and Tony, and then his family. Now that was the one thing that he got mad at me, but I was like, you're not going to get me in trouble here. I am calling your family and letting them know what's going on with you and where you are at with respect to this stage and process of your illness. But he really did not, he kind of gave it to me one time in the hospital, because until he could admit that he was at this stage, it was hard for him to have other people to come in to see him in that place where he hasn't already been able to admit that this is where he's at, and for them to see him that way. But with time, that did happen, and I'm so glad that those various loved ones were able to come and spend that time with him. My family as well, my siblings, and my parents, and but for a period of time, all he really wanted was just myself and our children. And even that was hard, because in preparing, like I said, it was not easy for my children. My son was 10 years old, and I know it really hurt my husband for a while. My son could not, he could not handle coming to see his dad in the hospital. We would literally have to try and trick him to get him to come, for him not to know that we were going to the hospital. But as soon as we would pull up, whether I was bringing him or if he was coming with his sisters, as soon as he saw that we were pulling up at the hospital, he didn't want to come in, because his dad was his hero. He couldn't handle seeing his dad in this place. He couldn't handle seeing his dad no longer with strength. And not only was that difficult for my son, but it was hard for my husband. And I had to keep trying to explain to him, babe, he can't handle seeing you like this. He knows you to be this strong dad, this dad who could do anything. And right now he's had to watch you deteriorate to a place of the dad he's never known. He's never known his dad to have to be weak. He's never known his dad to have to depend on people to take care of him. And so it was hard. But the beauty, once we were able, that was one of the other reasons we also had placed him in the assisted living, like convalescent home, is because it was more like a house than a hospital. And that would allow my son, which he did, to feel comfortable to go see his dad. So as I would say, preparing for the loss, as much, if you have time, if God blesses you to have time, use it wisely. Use it to deal with your financial issues. Use it to deal with what your spouse or your loved one may want or desire after they passed. And that was another thing that my husband and I discussed. One of the things we were supposed to do was go on another cruise. And unfortunately, once his health started changing, and of course he was battling the second go round with cancer, we kind of knew maybe this wasn't going to be able to happen. But the beauty is that before his passing, we were able to talk about that. And he was like, babe, you're young. You have a lot of life ahead of you. And I want you to be able to go and enjoy life after I'm gone. You're a beautiful woman, and I want you to be able to go and enjoy life. He's like, I want you to go on that cruise that we were supposed to go on. Go without me. And I said, I'm not going to go on a cruise without you. I'm not going to go by myself. And so he said, well, take the kids. And that's exactly what I did. I took the kids on a cruise a year after his passing, to a place, as he and I had discussed, that he and I had already gone before. So they could experience something that he and I had experienced together. And this was their first cruise. And it was a beautiful time. It was not only a beautiful time for them, but it was a beautiful time for me to be able to get away and to be in an environment, because by this point, we are now rebuilding as a family. We are now establishing our lives without their father, without my husband. And I'll go into this a little bit more, but we were in a new season figuring out what our lives were now going to be without him, which was something that we had never ever planned for. But who really does? Who plans to have to say goodbye to their loved one? But preparing for loss, take the time that you have to do the things that you can do in advance. Take the time to be able to grieve in advance. Take the time to be able to try and prepare, even though it may seem morbid. Take the time to try and prepare, whether it's your finances, whether it's preparing for funeral, whether it's preparing your home. For me, after he passed, there was a lot that I had to tend to. I had to now tend to taxes. I had to tend to our home. So there's a lot, and there's a lot of things that I wish I had prepared for a lot sooner, and I didn't, because I was too busy dealing with everything else that was going on, and I was still dealing with that level of grief. But the one thing that I will say to each and every one of you, as you are preparing for loss, if you have time, take the time and use it wisely. Thank you for coming and visiting another episode of the Unveiled Widow podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I do hope that you will come back and see me again. Again, don't forget, hit that subscribe button. Please become a part of the Unveiled Widow podcast. Again, if you are in this season like I am, where you have lost a loved one, or maybe you are preparing to lose a loved one, just remember